The emergency beacon screamed across the void with the desperation of a dying civilization. Ambassador Zexhai of the Korthani Republic watched the transmission data scroll across his neural interface, each line of code carrying the weight of his people's extinction. The signal strength is acceptable, reported his aide, Veltar, her crystalline features reflecting the blue glow of their ship systems. It should reach at least 47 star systems within the next rotation cycle. Zexhai nodded, though his forearms trembled slightly. The Korthani had never asked for help before. In their 3,000 years of galactic civilization, they had always been the ones offering assistance to lesser species. Now, with the Devourers consuming entire worlds on their advance toward Korthani Prime, pride meant nothing. "Have we received any responses?" he asked, trying to keep the hope from his voice. "Several automated acknowledgements from the Terran systems," Veltar replied, consulting her datapad. "Nothing more substantial yet." The Terran systems. Zexhai barely suppressed a laugh. Of all the species they might receive help from, humanity was among the least likely. The strange bipedal creatures had only achieved faster-than-light travel 300 years ago. They were considered a minor curiosity by most galactic powers, a species so young they still fought wars among themselves over resources their planets had in abundance. The humans had never participated in galactic politics. They attended the occasional diplomatic function, sent polite declinations to military alliances, and generally kept to themselves in their small cluster of systems. Most species viewed them as harmless isolationists who would probably destroy themselves within a few millennia anyway. "Sir," Veltar's voice interrupted his thoughts. "We're receiving a transmission from the Sol system." Zexhai straightened in his command chair. "Display it." The holographic projector activated, revealing a human female with dark skin and short-cropped hair. She wore what appeared to be a military uniform, though it looked remarkably simple compared to Korthani's ceremonial dress. "This is Admiral Saracen of the United Earth Defense Fleet," the human said in accented galactic standard. "We received your distress signal and are prepared to offer assistance. Our preliminary fleet will arrive at your coordinates in 72 hours. Please respond with tactical information about the threat you're facing." The transmission ended, leaving Zexhai staring at the empty space where the hologram had been. "Preliminary fleet?" Veltar asked, her voice confused. "What does that mean?" "I'm not certain," Zexhai admitted. He had expected a polite expression of sympathy, perhaps an offer to accept Korthani refugees. But this human spoke as if they intended to fight. "Sir, perhaps we should clarify that we're facing the Devourers," Veltar suggested. "The humans may not understand the magnitude of the threat." Zexhai considered this. The Devourers were a nightmare that had emerged from the galactic rim 18 months ago. They consumed everything, planets, stars, entire systems disappeared behind their advance. The greatest military minds of 12 species had tried to stop them and failed. "Open a channel to Earth," he ordered. The same human admiral appeared on screen, though this time the background showed what appeared to be a massive military complex with ships moving in the distance. "Admiral Chen," Zexhai began carefully, "I want to ensure you understand the nature of our situation. We face an enemy that has already consumed 47 star systems. They have defeated the combined fleets of the Korthani Republic, the Veltar Consortium, and the Zhang Empire. We estimate their numbers in the millions of vessels." The human's expression didn't change. "Understood, Ambassador. We're familiar with the Devourer threat. Our intelligence services have been tracking their advance for some time." "Then, you know this is likely a suicide mission," Zexhai said bluntly. "We're not asking you to sacrifice your people. We simply hoped you might be able to evacuate some of our civilians." Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment. "Ambassador, with respect, we didn't come this far to run evacuation missions. The preliminary fleet will establish a defensive perimeter while we assess Devourer capabilities. The main battle group will follow once we have tactical data." "Battle group?" Zexhai couldn't hide his surprise. "How many ships are you sending?" "The preliminary fleet consists of approximately 1,200 vessels," Chen replied matter-of-factly. "The main force will be significantly larger, depending on what we learn from initial contact." Zexhai felt his legs give out, and he sank into his command chair. 1,200 ships was more than most species could field in their entire military. And the humans were calling it preliminary. Admiral, he managed, forgive my confusion, but Earth's military was estimated at perhaps 50 vessels the last time we conducted a survey. Chen smiled for the first time, and Zexai found the expression somehow unsettling. Ambassador, that survey was conducted during peacetime. Humanity has certain capabilities that we don't advertise widely. Before Zexai could respond, Veltar was frantically gesturing at her instruments. Sir, we're detecting massive gravimetric disturbances throughout the system. What kind of disturbances? Zexai demanded. Jump signatures, she whispered. Hundreds of them. The main viewscreen automatically switched to external sensors, and Zexai felt his respiratory system seize. Ships were materializing throughout the system, not just a few dozen, but an endless stream of vessels dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. They weren't the sleek, elegant designs favored by most galactic civilizations. These ships looked brutal and functional, with thick armor plating and weapon arrays that spoke of a species intimately familiar with warfare. Some were massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the Korthani fleet. Others were smaller, faster vessels that moved with predatory grace. Admiral, Zexai said weakly, exactly how many ships are you bringing? Chen glanced at something off-screen before responding. The preliminary fleet numbers 1,247 vessels. The main battle force should arrive within the week with another 8,000 ships, plus support vessels. Support vessels? Zexai felt like he was drowning. Manufacturing ships, mobile shipyards, resource processors, medical vessels, that sort of thing. We learned long ago that sustainable warfare requires a mobile industrial base. The transmission continued, but Zexai wasn't really listening anymore. He watched in stunned silence as the human fleet arranged itself throughout the system with mechanical precision. Each ship took position as if following a predetermined plan, creating overlapping fields of fire and defensive coverage that spoke of centuries of tactical doctrine. Sir? Veltar's voice seemed to come from very far away. Yes? The humans are requesting permission to establish orbital manufacturing platforms around our outer planets. They say they need to begin resource extraction immediately. Zexai looked at the flood of ships still arriving and tried to process what he was seeing. How many species do you think know about this capability? I don't think any of us knew, Veltar replied quietly. How could we not know? On the viewscreen, Admiral Chen was still speaking. Recommend you prepare your civilian population for evacuation to safer systems while we establish our defensive positions. My people will need approximately 48 hours to complete preliminary fortifications. Fortifications? Nothing permanent, Chen assured him. Just some basic orbital defenses, minefield deployment, sensor arrays, that sort of thing. We'll try to keep environmental impact to a minimum. Zexai watched as massive human ships began moving toward the system's asteroid belt. Others were deploying what looked like construction equipment near the outer planets. Admiral Chen, he said finally, may I ask why Earth decided to help us? The human's expression grew serious. Ambassador, the Devourers represent a threat to all organic life in this galaxy. Humanity has a saying, united we stand, divided we fall. We learned that lesson the hard way during our early history. But surely you could have remained hidden. The Devourers might never have found Earth. Chen shook her head. They would have found us eventually. Better to face them here, where we have allies and favorable terrain, than alone in our own systems after they've consumed everything else. The transmission ended, leaving Zexai alone with his thoughts and the impossible sight outside his ship. In the space of 2 hours, his understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy had been completely overturned. Sir, Veltar said quietly, I'm receiving reports from across the system. The humans they're everywhere. They're mining asteroids, building structures, deploying automated factories. It's like they're preparing for a war that might last years. Zexai nodded absently. He was beginning to understand that humanity had been planning for this kind of conflict long before anyone knew the Devourers existed. Contact the Korthani High Command, he ordered. Tell them we may have made a terrible miscalculation about our human neighbors. As if to emphasize his point, another wave of ships dropped out of hyperspace, sleek vessels that looked different from the first wave. The identification codes marked them as coming from the Alpha Centauri system. Sir, those ships are arriving from different human colonies, Veltar reported. It appears each system is contributing its own fleet elements. Zexai felt a chill run down his spine. If each human system could field hundreds of ships, and there were dozens of human colonies. How many humans are there? He whispered. Veltar checked her datapad. According to our last census, approximately 40 billion across all their colonies. 40 billion. In a galaxy where most species numbered in the low millions, humanity had somehow built a civilization of 40 billion individuals without anyone noticing. And, apparently, every single one of them was now focused on stopping the Devourers. Outside, the human fleet continued to grow, each new arrival adding to what was already the largest military force HFY had ever seen. And, according to Admiral Chen, this was just the beginning. For the first time since the Devourers had appeared, HFY allowed himself to hope. Not just for survival, but for victory. Because if there was one thing he was learning about humans, it was that they didn't do anything halfway. The emergency beacon that had carried his people's plea for help into the void was still transmitting. But, now, instead of a cry of desperation, it felt like the opening note of a war song. And, humanity, it seemed, was very good at singing such songs. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, watching the tactical display that showed the approaching Devourer fleet. The enemy formation stretched across 3 light hours, a writhing mass of biomechanical ships that consumed everything in their path. Contact in 6 hours, Admiral, reported Commander Martinez from the tactical station. Final count shows approximately 2 million enemy vessels of various classifications. Chen nodded calmly, though privately she was impressed. Intelligence estimates had suggested the Devourer force would be large, but 2 million ships was beyond anything humanity had prepared for. Almost. Signal all fleet elements, she ordered. Implementation of Battle Plan Omega 7. Tell Admiral Zhang that his deep strike force is cleared for immediate deployment. Around her, the bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. These were veterans of the Centauri War and the Mars Rebellion conflicts that had taught humanity valuable lessons about large-scale space combat. Lessons they were about to put to use against an entirely different kind of enemy. Ma'am, interrupted Lieutenant Morrison from Communications, we're receiving another transmission from Ambassador HFY. The Corthani appeared on the main screen, his forearms gesturing frantically. Behind him, Chen could see other Corthani officials arguing in their musical language. Admiral Chen, HFY began, our long-range sensors show the Devourer fleet in detail for the first time. The scale is. I must advise immediate evacuation. No force can stand against 2 million vessels. With respect, Ambassador, Chen replied, you might be surprised what humanity can accomplish when we put our minds to it. Besides, we're not standing against them alone. What do you mean? Chen gestured to her tactical officer, who updated the display visible to the Corthani. The holographic representation of the star system now showed the true extent of the human deployment. HFY's response was immediate and visceral. His translator couldn't capture the sound he made, but Chen had heard similar noises from humans who had just learned they were standing next to a nuclear warhead. That's impossible, the ambassador whispered. The display showed over 15,000 human vessels arranged in a complex 3-dimensional formation that extended throughout the star system. But, more importantly, it showed the installations humanity had built in less than 48 hours. Massive orbital defense platforms surrounded the inner planets. The asteroid belt had been transformed into a fortress zone bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. Mobile shipyards were producing new vessels at a rate that defied belief, while resource extraction operations had already begun processing entire moons. How? HFY asked simply. Modular construction techniques, Chen explained. Most of our infrastructure can be rapidly deployed and assembled in the field. It's a lesson we learned during our early colonial expansion, sometimes you need to build a civilization quickly. What she didn't mention was that humanity had been preparing for this kind of war for over a century. The lessons of Earth's violent history had taught them that conflict was inevitable, and, when it came, it would come fast and hard. Admiral, Commander Martinez called out, we're receiving deployment confirmations from all sector commands. Seoul Defense Force is in position. The Luna shipyards report full production capacity. Mars Industrial Command has completed the ammunition manufacturing centers. Chen nodded. What about the outer system defenses? Jupiter Command reports all orbital gun platforms online. Saturn's ring mines are producing at maximum capacity. The Kuiper Belt installations are fully operational. Zexhai was staring at the tactical display with the expression of someone watching reality reshape itself.
You've militarized your entire star system.
Not militarized, Chen corrected.
Mobilized. There's a difference.
Every human colony, every space habitat, every mining station can contribute to the war effort when necessary. It's not that we're warlike, we just learned to be prepared. The truth was more complex than she was letting on. Humanity's expansion into space had been driven partly by curiosity, but mostly by the knowledge that their homeworld was fragile and their species vulnerable. The early colonial wars had taught them that space was not a peaceful frontier, and the discovery of other sapient species had only reinforced that lesson. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Morrison, "we're receiving communications from the advancing Devourer fleet."
Put it through.
The transmission was unlike anything Chen had ever encountered. It wasn't language in any conventional sense, but rather a complex pattern of electromagnetic pulses that her ship's AI translated into meaning rather than words.
Consumption approaches. Resistance is inefficient. Surrender biomass for processing.
Charming, Chen muttered. Send them our standard response. The reply was simple and required no translation, a single word transmitted in perfect mathematical harmony across all frequencies.
No.
The effect on the Devourer fleet was immediate. The massive formation shifted, accelerating toward the human defensive positions with what could only be described as anger. "All ships, prepare for engagement," Chen ordered.
"Remember, we're not just fighting for our own survival.
Every species in this galaxy is depending on us to stop these things here." "Admiral," called Commander Martinez, "the Korthani fleet is moving to join our formation."
Chen watched as the elegant Korthani vessels took position alongside human ships.
There were only 47 Korthani vessels left from what had once been one of the galaxy's most powerful navies, but they moved with the dignity of a species that had never surrendered.
"Signal Ambassador Zexhai," Chen ordered.
"Tell him his ships are welcome in our formation, but they should prepare for a different kind of warfare than they're used to."
The Devourer fleet was now close enough for detailed sensor analysis.
The individual ships were massive, some larger than human dreadnoughts, but they moved with organic fluidity that suggested they were more grown than built. Weapons arrays pulsed with bioluminescent energy, and the hull seemed to shift and change as the ships prepared for battle.
"Ma'am," reported Lieutenant Morrison, "we're detecting massive energy buildups throughout the enemy fleet. They're preparing to fire. All ships, brace for incoming fire. Defensive formation Alpha. Point defense systems to maximum." The first Devourer's salvo lit up space like a stellar eruption. Beams of coherent energy and streams of what appeared to be weaponized plasma lanced across the void toward the human fleet. But, instead of striking their targets, most of the incoming fire was intercepted by a wall of defensive fire that erupted from thousands of point defense systems. What got through was absorbed by energy shields that flared like miniature stars around each ship. When the barrage ended, the human formation was intact and unchanged. "Return fire," Chen ordered calmly. "All batteries, target the largest enemy vessels. Let's show them what human engineering can accomplish."
The human response was devastating in its precision. Instead of the wild, organic energy discharges of the Devourers, human weapons fired with mechanical accuracy. Railgun projectiles traveled at significant fractions of lightspeed, while directed energy weapons cut through space with surgical precision. The effect on the Devourer formation was immediate and catastrophic. Ships that had seemed invulnerable began to break apart under the focused human fire. But, instead of debris, the destroyed vessels released clouds of smaller craft that swarmed toward the human lines.
"Drone swarms incoming," reported Martinez. "Estimated count in the millions." "Deploy the Wasps," Chen ordered. From every human ship, launch bays opened to release their own swarms of unmanned fighters.
Unlike the organic chaos of the Devourer drones, the human Wasps moved with perfect coordination, their AI-controlled formations adapting instantly to changing conditions. The two swarms met in the space between the fleets, and the void erupted in a storm of micro-explosions as millions of tiny combatants destroyed each other in seconds. But, for every human Wasp that was destroyed, 3 Devourer drones died in return. Ambassador Zexhai's voice crackled over the communication system.
"Admiral Chen, this is extraordinary.
We've never seen the Devourers take such losses in the opening moments of battle." "We're just getting started," Chen replied. "All ships, advance to engagement range. Time to see how well these things fight when we get up close." The human fleet began to move forward, their formation shifting from defensive to aggressive. The massive dreadnoughts led the way, their heavy armor and shields designed to absorb enemy fire while the smaller vessels maneuvered for optimal firing positions. But, as they advanced, Chen noticed something that made her smile grimly. The Devourer fleet, which had seemed unstoppable as it consumed system after system, was hesitating. "Ma'am," reported Martinez, "enemy formation is fragmenting. They're not maintaining their advance." Chen studied the tactical display. The Devourers had expected easy prey, another frightened species that would collapse under their assault. Instead, they had encountered an enemy that fought back with cold, calculated ferocity. "Signal all commands," she ordered. Phase 2 is approved. Release the Raptors. Throughout the human fleet, specialized ships began to separate from the main formation. These were humanity's newest weapons, vessels designed specifically for fighting large-scale engagements against overwhelming numbers. The Raptors were sleek, fast, and carried weapons that could punch through almost any defense. More importantly, they were controlled by tactical AIs that had been trained on every battle humanity had ever fought, from ancient terrestrial conflicts to the most recent colonial wars. As the Raptors engaged the Devourer fleet, Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The enemy had made a critical error. They had assumed that all organic species would fight the same way. They had never encountered a species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. Admiral, called Lieutenant Morrison, were receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Other species are monitoring this engagement. Let them watch, Chen replied. It's time they learned what humans are really capable of. Outside, the battle raged with increasing intensity. But, for the first time since the Devourers had appeared, they were the ones taking devastating losses. And, humanity was just beginning to show its true strength. The battle had been raging for 18 hours, and Captain Marcus Webb was beginning to understand why the Devourers had been so successful against other species. The enemy didn't just fight, they adapted in real time, learning from each engagement and modifying their tactics accordingly. Status report: Webb called out from the command chair of the UES Valkyrie, a Raptor-class assault vessel that had been dancing through the enemy formation for the past 6 hours. Hull integrity at 73%, reported Chief Petty Officer Kim from Damage Control. Forward railgun array is operating at reduced capacity, but the particle beam systems are fully operational. Webb nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the flow of battle throughout the system. The human fleet had successfully blunted the initial Devourer assault, but the enemy was proving more resourceful than expected. What had started as a straightforward defensive action was evolving into something far more complex. "Sir," called Ensign Torres from the sensor station, "I'm detecting massive movement in the enemy rear formation. Something big is coming through." Webb enhanced the long-range sensors and felt his blood freeze. Emerging from hyperspace behind the main Devourer fleet was something that defied description. It was less a ship than a living ecosystem, a structure so massive it could have housed entire populations, bristling with weapons and pulsing with bioluminescent energy. "Contact Admiral Chen immediately," he ordered. Priority Alpha. The communication established just as alarms began sounding throughout the human fleet. Admiral Chen's face appeared on screen, her expression grim. "I see it, Captain. That appears to be a Devourer command vessel, what our intelligence services call a hive mind. We knew they existed, but we've never encountered one in battle." "Orders, ma'am?" "Continue current operations. We have assets specifically designed for this scenario." Webb frowned. The human fleet was already engaged with 2 million enemy vessels. What assets could possibly handle something the size of a small moon? His question was answered when space itself seemed to ripple near the outer edge of the system. Emergency klaxons sounded as gravimetric sensors detected massive spacetime distortions. "Sir," Torres reported, her voice tight with disbelief, "I'm reading jump signatures unlike anything in our databases. The displacement mass calculations don't make sense." The distortions resolved into something that made Webb question his understanding of human military capabilities. Ships were emerging from hyperspace, but not the sleek vessels of the first human fleet. These were massive, brutally functional structures that looked like they had been designed by engineers who viewed subtlety as a character flaw. "Jesus Christ," whispered Chief Kim. "Those things are enormous." The largest of the newcomers was over 20 kilometers long, its hull bristling with weapon arrays that could reduce planets to debris. Behind it came dozens of similar vessels, each one a monument to humanity's capacity for warfare on a galactic scale.
"This is Admiral Zhang of the Seoul Deep Strike Force," came a transmission that reached every ship in the system. "All vessels clear attack vectors. We are engaging the primary target." Webb watched in fascination as the massive human ships moved with surprising grace toward the devourer hive mind. These were humanity's planet killers, weapons built during the darkest period of the colonial wars when it had seemed like the only way to survive was to ensure that no enemy could ever threaten human worlds. "Captain Webb," Admiral Chan's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Take your squadron and provide escort for the heavy assault ships. The devourers are going to throw everything they have at Zhang's force." "Understood, Admiral. All Raptors, form on my position. We're running interference."
The Valkyrie and her sister ships accelerated toward the advancing human dreadnoughts, their smaller size allowing them to weave between the massive vessels. Around them, space erupted as the Devourer fleet reacted to this new threat.
The enemy response was immediate and desperate.
Instead of the coordinated attacks they had been using against the main human fleet, the Devourers began throwing everything they had at Admiral Zhang's ships: suicide runs, massive energy discharges, even ramming attacks that destroyed their own vessels. "Sir," reported Torres, "the enemy is abandoning their engagement with our main fleet.
They're concentrating everything on the dreadnoughts." Webb could understand why.
The Seoul Deep Strike Force represented a level of destructive capability that could threaten the hive mind itself. But, as he watched the massive human ships absorb punishment that would have destroyed entire fleets, he began to appreciate just how thoroughly humanity had prepared for this moment. "Target the incoming swarm formations," he ordered.
"Clear the path for the big guns."
The Raptors began their deadly dance, using their superior speed and maneuverability to carve through the Devourer formations. But Webb could see that the enemy was learning even from this engagement, their tactics shifting to counter human advantages. "They're adapting faster than expected," he muttered.
"Sir?" Torres looked confused. "The Devourers. They're not just mindless consumers.
They're analyzing our tactics and developing countermeasures in real time.
Look at the formation changes." It was true.
The Devourer swarms were beginning to move in patterns that minimized the effectiveness of human weapons, while their larger vessels were concentrating fire in ways that tested the limits of human shielding. But, if the Devourers could adapt, so could humanity.
"All Raptors, implement Protocol 7, Webb ordered. Random engagement patterns, maximum unpredictability."
The human fighters immediately began varying their attack runs, using quantum randomizers to ensure that their movements couldn't be predicted or countered. It was a tactic developed during war games against human AI's opponents that could calculate optimal responses to any predictable strategy.
The effect was immediate.
The Devourer formations, which had been adapting to counter human tactics, suddenly found themselves unable to predict where the next attack would come from. "Sir," Torres called out excitedly, "Admiral Zhang's force has reached optimal firing position." Webb turned his attention to the massive human ships, which had positioned themselves in a formation that brought their heaviest weapons to bear on the hive mind. What happened next would be burned into his memory for the rest of his life.
The Seoul Deep Strike Force fired as one.
The weapons they unleashed weren't conventional armaments. These were devices that manipulated matter and energy at the quantum level, tools that could unmake the fundamental forces that held atoms together.
The effect on the hive mind was catastrophic.
Sections of the massive structure simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but, rather converted back into their component particles. Other areas began to collapse as the exotic matter that comprised their construction lost coherence.
But, the hive mind wasn't defenseless.
As it died, it released something that made Webb's sensors scream warnings. "All ships, emergency evasive maneuvers."
Admiral Zhang's voice cut through the communication channels.
"It's releasing a quantum cascade." Webb barely had time to understand the warning before space around the dying hive mind began to tear itself apart. The cascade effect spread outward like a stellar explosion, threatening to consume everything within several light minutes.
"Full reverse thrust," Webb ordered. "Get us away from that thing."
The Valkyrie and her escorts raced away from the expanding zone of destruction, but Webb could see that some of the Devourer ships weren't so fortunate. The cascade consumed hundreds of enemy vessels before Admiral Zhang's ships deployed containment fields that stopped its spread. When the chaos finally subsided, Webb found himself staring at empty space where the hive mind had been. The massive structure was simply gone, leaving behind only scattered debris and the slowly dissipating energy of its death throes. "Status report," he called out. "All human vessels accounted for," Torres reported. "The Devourer fleet is retreating, sir." Webb enhanced his sensors and confirmed what his ensign had observed. The remaining Devourer ships were withdrawing from the system, their formation ragged and broken. For the first time since they had appeared on the galactic rim, the Devourers had been not just defeated, but routed.
"Sir," Chief Kim called from damage control, "we're receiving a transmission from Ambassador HFY."
The Corthani appeared on screen, his translator struggling with what appeared to be a form of his language that no human had heard before. "Admiral Chen," he finally managed in Galactic Standard, "what we have witnessed today, we have no words. The Devourers have consumed entire civilizations, and you have destroyed them in a single engagement."
Admiral Chan's voice came through the ship's communication system.
"The Devourers made a mistake, Ambassador.
They assumed that all organic species would be easy prey.
But humanity learned long ago that sometimes the only way to ensure peace is to be prepared for war."
Webb listened to the exchange while studying the tactical display.
The immediate threat was over, but he could see that this was just the beginning.
The galaxy was vast, and there would be other threats, other enemies that would test humanity's resolve.
But, for the first time since the Devourers had appeared, those other species would know that they weren't alone. Humanity had revealed itself not as a minor curiosity, but as a force capable of standing against the darkness. "Sir," Torres called out, "we're receiving communications from across the galaxy.
The Veltar Consortium, the Zhang Empire, dozens of other species. They're all asking the same question.
Which is? They want to know if humanity would be willing to help them rebuild their defenses." Webb smiled grimly. The galaxy was about to learn that when humans made friends, they made them for life. And, when they made enemies, they made sure those enemies understood the consequences. The age of humanity hiding in the shadows was over.
What came next would reshape the galaxy itself.
3 months after the Battle of Corthani Prime, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Coordination Council on Nexus Station. The massive chamber, designed to accommodate representatives from 43 different species, had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. "The motion before the council," announced Speaker Mordan, a towering insectoid from the Hive Worlds, "is to formally establish the Terran defense protocols across all member systems.
Ambassador Vasquez of Earth will present humanity's proposal."
Elena rose from her seat, conscious that every eye in the chamber was focused on her.
3 months ago, these same representatives had barely acknowledged humanity's existence.
Now they hung on her every word. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems, "we gather today not as separate species, but as neighbors who have seen what cooperation can accomplish." She activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber, showing the current tactical situation across the galaxy. Red zones marked areas where Devourer remnants still operated, while green indicated systems now protected by joint human-alien defense forces. In the 94 days since the destruction of the primary hive mind, our combined forces have eliminated 17 secondary Devourer fleets and liberated over 200 star systems.
A ripple of approval went through the assembly.
Representative Corval of the Zhang Empire raised one of his 6 arms to speak. "Ambassador Vasquez, while we are grateful for human assistance, many of our military leaders question the sustainability of your current deployment levels. Intelligence reports suggest humanity is maintaining active defense forces in over 3,000 star systems simultaneously."
Elena smiled.
It was a question she had been expecting.
Representative Corval raises an important point.
Perhaps it would be helpful to address some common misconceptions about human military organization. She gestured to her aide, Commander Sarah Kim, who updated the holographic display to show the structure of human space. "What you're seeing is not a single military deployment, but rather the activation of humanity's distributed defense network. Every human colony, research station, and industrial facility is capable of contributing to galactic defense when necessary."
The display zoomed in to show a typical human colony world. What had appeared from space to be a peaceful agricultural settlement revealed itself to be something far more complex. "This is New Geneva, a farming world with a population of 800,000, Elena explained.
In addition to producing food for 12 other systems, New Geneva maintains a defensive fleet of 400 ships, orbital manufacturing facilities, and a military academy that graduates 1,500 officers annually.
Representative Yikstar of the Crystalline Collective made a sound that the translators rendered as skeptical curiosity. You are suggesting that every human settlement is a military installation? Not military, Elena corrected. Prepared. There's a difference. Human history taught us that the price of survival is eternal vigilance. We learned to build our civilization so that every component could contribute to defense when necessary. She changed the display to show Earth itself, revealing the massive orbital infrastructure that surrounded humanity's homeworld. Earth supports a population of 12 billion. But, more importantly, it serves as the coordination center for a defense network that spans 217 star systems. Every human world contributes resources, personnel, and intelligence to ensure that no threat can surprise us again. Ambassador HFY of the Corthani Republic spoke for the first time. Ambassador Vasquez, you say this network spans 217 systems. Our last census showed humanity controlling 47 systems. Elena nodded. The census was accurate for colonial worlds. What it didn't account for were research stations, mining operations, deep space monitoring posts, and what we call dark colonies, settlements that exist primarily to provide early warning and support capabilities. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Humanity has been preparing for galactic-scale warfare for over 2 centuries. We simply chose not to advertise that fact. Representative Thulmak of the warrior clans leaned forward, his predatory features showing interest rather than challenge. You speak of preparation spanning centuries. Yet your species achieved faster than light travel only 300 years ago. True, Elena acknowledged. But, we achieved nuclear weapons and space travel before that. By the time we developed FTL capability, we had already learned that the universe was not a peaceful place. Our early expansion was guided by one principle: never again would humanity be vulnerable to extinction-level threats. Commander Kim updated the display to show humanity's expansion pattern. Unlike the neat, orderly progression favored by most species, human expansion had followed complex three-dimensional patterns that maximized defensive coverage while establishing redundant supply lines. Every human settlement was positioned to support at least 3 others, Elena explained. Every colony was designed to be self-sufficient while contributing to the greater defense network. We call it the Fortress Doctrine. The chamber was silent as the representatives absorbed this information. Finally, Speaker Mordan spoke. Ambassador Vasquez, you are describing a civilization organized entirely around the concept of warfare. How do we know that humanity will not turn these capabilities against us? It was the question Elena had been waiting for, the one that would determine humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. Speaker Mordan, that question demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature, she replied calmly. Yes, we prepare for war. But, we do so because we value peace. Human military doctrine is based on a simple principle: the best way to avoid fighting is to be so well prepared for it that potential enemies choose negotiation instead. She gestured to Commander Kim, who brought up a new display showing trade statistics. Since the Battle of Corthani Prime, human-civilian trade with alien species has increased by 400%. We're sharing agricultural techniques with the Veltar, exchanging scientific data with the Crystalline Collective, and providing industrial assistance to the Zhang Empire. Our military capabilities don't exist to dominate others, they exist to protect this. Representative Corval made a gesture that indicated thoughtful consideration. You speak of protection, but your fleet capabilities exceed those of any known civilization. What assurance do we have that human priorities will not change? Elena had been hoping someone would ask that question. Representative Corval, I'd like to introduce you to someone. The chamber's main doors opened, and a figure in human military uniform entered. But this wasn't just any officer, the insignia and bearing identified him as one of humanity's most senior commanders. This is Admiral Marcus Cole, commander of the Seoul Defense Force and the architect of our victory over the Devourers. Admiral Cole, would you please explain to the Assembly why humanity chose to reveal its true capabilities? Cole stepped forward, his weathered features showing the strain of commanding fleets in battles that had shaped the galaxy's future. Honored representatives, he began, 3 months ago, we faced a choice. We could have remained hidden, allowing the Devourers to consume other civilizations while we prepared our own defenses. Or we could reveal ourselves and stand together against a common threat. He paused, his gaze moving across the assembled aliens. The choice was easy. Humanity learned long ago that survival isn't about being the strongest, it's about ensuring that strength serves something greater than itself. We revealed our capabilities not to dominate the galaxy, but to save it. Cole activated his own holographic display, showing the current deployment of human forces. Today, human fleets protect 43 different species across thousands of systems. We're not occupying these worlds, we're defending them.
When the threat is over, we'll return to our own space and go back to the quiet expansion that served us for 3 centuries.
Representative Thomax stood, his imposing figure commanding attention. Admiral Cole, the warrior clans have fought alongside human forces for 3 months.
We have observed your tactics, your discipline, your capabilities.
We have one question: why have you never sought to conquer? Cole's answer was simple and direct.
Because we learned from our own history that conquerors eventually destroy themselves.
We chose a different path. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives conferred with their advisors.
Elena watched the debates unfold, knowing that the decision made here would shape the galaxy for centuries to come.
Finally, Speaker Mordan called for order. The Council will now vote on the Terran defense protocols. All in favor? One by one, the representatives cast their votes.
The Corthani Republic voted yes immediately, followed by the Veltar Consortium. The Zhang Empire deliberated for several minutes before adding their approval.
When the final vote was tallied, the result was unanimous: 43 species had chosen to formally ally themselves with humanity. The motion passes, Speaker Mordan announced.
The Terran defense protocols are hereby established as the foundation for galactic security. Elena felt a weight settle on her shoulders that had nothing to do with the ceremony's formal robes. Humanity had just accepted responsibility for protecting the entire galaxy, a responsibility they would carry for generations to come. But, as she looked around the chamber at the representatives of dozens of species who had chosen to trust humanity with their survival, she felt something else: hope. The galaxy would never be completely safe. There would be other threats, other challenges that would test the alliance forged in the fires of the Devourer War. But, for the first time in galactic history, those challenges would be met by species standing together rather than facing them alone. And, at the heart of that alliance would be humanity, no longer the quiet species hiding in the shadows, but the guardians of a peaceful galaxy they had helped to create. 2 years had passed since the establishment of the Terran defense protocols, and Captain Lisa Park stood on the observation deck of the UES Harmony, watching the impossible sight unfolding before her. The station they were approaching defied every conventional understanding of engineering. It was massive beyond comprehension, a structure that spanned over 100 kilometers and housed representatives from every known sapient species in the galaxy. But what made it truly remarkable wasn't its size, but what it represented. New Geneva Station is now within standard communication range, reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson from the bridge. They're requesting our diplomatic credentials and cargo manifest. Send them our standard identification, Park replied, though she couldn't suppress a smile. The idea that anyone would question a human ship's right to approach this station was amusing, given that humanity had provided most of the technology and resources that made its construction possible. New Geneva Station wasn't just a diplomatic facility, it was proof that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Built in the space between 3 star systems, it served as the neutral ground where 43 different species worked together to maintain the peace that humanity had helped create.
Captain, called Ensign Torres from the sensor station, I'm reading some interesting traffic around the station. It looks like delegations from at least 20 species are currently in residence. Park nodded. It wasn't unusual anymore.
What had started as emergency cooperation during the Devourer crisis had evolved into something no one had anticipated: a true galactic civilization based on mutual defense and shared prosperity. Ma'am, Jackson continued, Admiral Chen sends her compliments and requests that you join her in Conference Room 7 upon arrival. She says the Council of Species has reached a decision about the Outer Rim situation. The Outer Rim situation. Park had been hoping to avoid that particular discussion, but she knew it was inevitable. For the past 6 months, long-range sensors had been detecting disturbing signals from beyond the galactic edge, transmissions that suggested the Devourers hadn't been completely eliminated. The Harmony docked at New Geneva Station with practiced efficiency, and Park made her way through corridors that bustled with more diversity than Earth's early science fiction writers could have imagined. Corthani diplomats discussed trade agreements with crystal and collective representatives, while Zhang Empire military advisors worked alongside human engineers on defensive improvements. Conference Room 7 was one of the station's premier facilities, designed to accommodate the physical needs of dozens of different species simultaneously. When Park entered, she found Admiral Chen seated at a curved table alongside representatives from every major galactic power.
Captain Park, Admiral Chen greeted her, "Thank you for coming. Please, take a seat. We have much to discuss."
Park settled into her chair, noting the tension in the room. Ambassador HFY of the Korthani Republic looked particularly concerned, while Representative Thelmac of the warrior clans seemed eager for action.
"Admiral," Park began, "what exactly has the Council decided about the Outer Rim?" Before Chen could answer, the room's holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red warning indicators pulsed at the very edge of known space.
"Captain," said Speaker Mordan, his translated voice carrying unmistakable gravity, "our long-range monitoring stations have confirmed our worst fears.
The devourer hive mind we destroyed was not unique. Intelligence analysis suggests there are others, perhaps many others, in the void between galaxies."
Park studied the display, her military training automatically calculating distances and deployment times.
"How many are we talking about?" Ambassador Vasquez, now serving as humanity's chief diplomatic representative to the Council, activated additional data overlays.
"Conservative estimates suggest at least 3 additional hive minds, each commanding fleets that dwarf what we faced at Korthani Prime."
"Worst-case scenarios? Well, let's focus on what we know for certain."
Representative Corval of the Zhang Empire leaned forward. "The question before us is not whether these threats exist, but how we respond to them. Some council members advocate a defensive posture, strengthening our borders and preparing for invasion."
"And others?"
Park asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer.
Admiral Chan answered.
"Others believe we should take the fight to them before they can organize another assault on galactic civilization."
The room fell silent as the implications of that statement settled.
Park could see the divide clearly. Some species favored the cautious approach that had served them for millennia, while others supported the more aggressive doctrine that humanity had demonstrated during the Devourer War.
"What does Earth recommend?"
Park asked.
Admiral Chen activated another display, this one showing fleet deployment patterns throughout human space. "The Seoul Defense Council has developed what we call the Forward Shield Protocol.
Instead of waiting for the enemy to come to us, we establish advanced defensive positions beyond the galactic rim." The holographic map expanded to show human ships moving into the void between galaxies, creating a defensive perimeter that stretched across hundreds of light-years.
"It's ambitious," admitted Representative Yixtar of the Crystalline Collective. "But the resource requirements would be enormous.
Even with our combined industrial capacity, such an undertaking would strain our economies."
Park smiled. "Representative Yixtar, I think you may be underestimating human industrial capacity."
She gestured to Admiral Chen, who updated the display to show something that made several representatives gasp. The void between galaxies wasn't empty anymore. Massive human construction projects were already underway, building infrastructure on a scale that dwarfed anything previously attempted.
"These are the deep space construction platforms," Chen explained. "Fully automated facilities capable of processing raw matter into finished products."
They've been operational for 8 months, preparing for exactly this scenario.
Ambassador HFY made a sound that the translators couldn't interpret. "Admiral Chen, you're describing construction projects on a galactic scale. How is such a thing possible?"
"Because we learned to think beyond planetary limitations," Chen replied. "When humanity first reached space, we realized that our future lay not in controlling worlds, but in mastering the void itself. These platforms don't just build ships, they create entire defensive networks from cosmic dust and stellar matter." Park watched the reactions around the table as the true scope of human preparation became clear. While other species had focused on defending their worlds, humanity had been quietly colonizing the empty spaces between stars. "The Forward Shield Protocol isn't just about military deployment," Chen continued.
"It's about extending galactic civilization itself. We're not just building defensive stations, we're creating new worlds, new habitats, new possibilities for all our species." Representative Thelmac stood, his warrior's instincts clearly aroused. "Admiral Chen, the warrior clans pledge our full support to this endeavor. When do we begin?"
"Actually," Chen replied with a slight smile, "we began 2 years ago.
The forward shield is already operational."
The holographic display shifted again, showing the current state of the extragalactic defenses. Park had known the project existed, but seeing the full scope was breathtaking. Hundreds of defensive platforms stretched across the galactic rim, supported by mobile fleets and automated manufacturing centers.
"My God," whispered Park. "You've built a wall around the entire galaxy."
"Not a wall," Chen corrected.
"A gateway."
"The forward shield doesn't just protect us from external threats, it allows us to expand beyond our own galaxy when we're ready."
The implications hit the room like a physical force.
Humanity wasn't just proposing to defend the galaxy, they were suggesting the next phase of galactic evolution. "Admiral," said Speaker Mordan carefully, "you're describing the transformation of our entire civilization.
Are we ready for such a change?" Admiral Chen looked around the table, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of worlds. "Speaker Mordan, that decision isn't mine to make.
But I can tell you this, the universe is vast, and it contains wonders we can't imagine.
The Devourers showed us that isolation isn't safety.
True security comes from expanding our horizons, not limiting them." Park found herself nodding in agreement. The lesson of the Devourer War wasn't that the galaxy needed better defenses, it was that the galaxy needed to grow beyond its current limitations.
"What would you need from the Council?" asked Ambassador Vasquez.
"Volunteers," Chen replied simply. "The forward shield is operational, but expanding it requires personnel from all our species."
"We're not just building defenses, we're building the foundation for galactic civilization's next chapter." One by one, the representatives began to speak.
The Corthani Republic offered their finest engineers. The Crystalline Collective provided advanced materials technology. The Zhang Empire pledged their most experienced military commanders. When the last representative had spoken, Speaker Mordan called for a formal vote.
"All in favor of supporting the Forward Shield Protocol?" The vote was unanimous.
As the meeting concluded and representatives began to file out, Park remained behind with Admiral Chen. "Admiral," she said quietly, "you've just committed humanity to defending not just this galaxy, but potentially others as well.
Are we ready for that responsibility?" Chen smiled, the expression carrying the weight of 2 years of careful planning and preparation.
"Captain Park, we've been ready for this since the day we first looked up at the stars.
We just didn't know it yet."
Park nodded, understanding finally why humanity had spent centuries preparing for threats that didn't seem to exist. They hadn't been preparing for war, they'd been preparing for the moment when their species would step forward to guide galactic civilization into an unimaginable future. Outside the conference room, the galaxy continued its ancient dance around a central star. But, for the first time in its history, that dance was guided by the wisdom of species who had chosen cooperation over competition, growth over stagnation, hope over fear. And, at the heart of that choice was humanity, no longer the hidden species at the edge of civilization, but the guardians of a future that stretched beyond the stars themselves.
The age of galactic humanity had begun.